Welcome, everyone, to the PGA Players Podcast. Today, we have our guest, Cory Jez, founder of TourIQ. TourIQ helps PGA Tour professionals use data to improve their games. I met Cory out on tour working with players. I've been super impressed with how he uses analytics, not only to help guys map out courses, but really understand their games and how they can get better. He's a former director of analytics for the Utah Jazz and Austin FC from the MLS. Welcome, Cory. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much for having me. Excited to talk shop a little bit, get nerdy today.
Yeah, I think I know numbers well, and then I talk to you, and I feel like a kindergartner. So I appreciate your knowledge base here. Let's where I want to start is kind of your past data analytics life with in the NBA and MLS. And then kind of your journey here to golf and how that has helped.
Yeah. So it's been it's been kind of a very kind of odd career arc, if you will. Nobody's is the same, but I graduated college back in 2010, 2011, and played a little bit in school, not very much. Like I was the guy with the individual asterisk by his name, kind of a thing, and so. Always have loved golf, always play competitively. Still, like you make the mid-am. I try to make the mid-am every year, but so I've always loved and been a competitive golfer. But when I went out after graduation, started working as kind of a data analyst, entry-level data analyst, kind of cut my teeth in terms of the skills, the technologies, ended up getting a master's degree, all that type of stuff, statistics, coding, kind of what has become analytics in a lot of industries, right? It's relevant in a lot of places, not just sports. But, my dad was a college basketball coach. I really love basketball as the other sport that I, really, really tracked and followed, both college and pro. And so I graduated college 2011, which is literally the year that the movie Moneyball came out. It's impossible to kind of tell my story without saying the word Moneyball. I've tried, and it's just easier to explain it that way. But
yeah, I think anybody in analytics is going to hear Moneyball related, whether good or bad, or whether relevant or not.
Yeah, and maybe the term analytics can be certainly polarizing at times, but at the end of the day, we're trying to take a type of information, quantitative information, use it to help people make decisions. I mean, that's all we're really trying to do. And so for me, the movie came out, and I started seeing more and more in the space of like, hey, linear regression and data visualization, all these types of things that I was doing professionally, albeit not in sports early in my career, I was starting to see happening in sport. Obviously baseball, first mover, the NBA kind of second behind that, and saying, well, that's the stuff I'm really interested in. It's what I spend all my time reading about and watching and talking to people about and seeing if there's a way I could kind of join those two up. So I was very lucky, kind of 5-6 years into my career, to be able to kind of make that jump from industry into sports. And like you said, worked with the Utah Jazz for 4 or 5 seasons as their head of analytics. And then spent about 18 months in the MLS with Austin FC as well before I figured out a way to kind of translate it into golf. And obviously, being a competitive golfer and being someone who's played my whole life, that was like the ultimate kind of marriage for me.
Nice. Yeah. Did you always want to get back into golf, or did you think, hey, I'm going to see where this takes me in sports? And, it was more of, I don't want to say an epiphany, but hey, as you've gotten in, saw how it worked in the NBA, was able to rise all the way to director of analytics there for the Utah Jazz. Like, hey, I could actually see an application for this in golf.
Yeah, I think there probably was actually an epiphany moment for me. I remember when I was doing my master's degree and I was trying to think of what to do for my master's thesis. They would give you like corporate company data sets, and you could do something with that and work on a project on behalf of like a corporate partner. And that just wasn't very interesting to me. But I was able to scrape some ShotLink data from the old PGA Tour website. It's a little harder to get now. And I was able to write my master's thesis based on, ShotLink data. And I still specifically remember this would have been like 2019 or 2020, but sending it to one of my buddies who I played golf with, and was like, oh man, like I can do this with this, and like this, what I'm in grad school for and what I'm doing professionally, combined with, golf being the thing I love to do more than anything else, was really, really exciting to me. And so did I know I was gonna be able to make it into a career or, beyond just a hobby? Like I was very lucky to get introduced to some guys who played, at different levels and mini tours and some of the, Korn Ferry, PGA Tour Americas at the time or Canada at the time, and start figuring out what professional golfers wanted out of this information. Because I've always been very kind of application oriented, like product oriented when it comes to analytics. There's a very academic side of it, which is foundational, right? It's how you come up with things like strokes gained. It's, the people in academia are what are doing that kind of the complex math work to build those metrics, but then you have to take it to the consumer, right? You have to take it to the person who's going to use it. And so I've always been very focused on what are the questions we can answer and what are the things that we can try to solve. We look at like the NLCS is going on right now, Brewers versus Dodgers. My Brewers are down 0-2 as we speak. And both those groups have 30 plus people working in their like technology and analytics groups, right? And that's across data science and software engineering and the coaches whose job it is to translate it to the bench coach and all of those things. And so, and I had similar experience obviously in the NBA. And so how could I take that and translate it, make it useful for a PGA Tour player? I think that's been the biggest, area I've, really grown in and understood. Like, how do we actually apply this to them? Because we can do fancy numbers and models and pretty pictures and visuals and make it cool and make it work on your iPhone. But like, if it doesn't answer and help you intervene or do things specifically, it's just, kind of data for data's sake.
Yeah, that's what I've been really impressed with is it's, being able to peek behind the curtain a little bit with you. The data's there to help reinforce the right things and give insight more than just, hey, the top level of like, hey, here's what's available on ShotLink. But then, hey, what does this actually mean? But then putting it into we'll say consumer facing, but a player facing platform that's easily understandable, easily digestible, where they can actually do something with it. And again, not comparing you to anybody else, but just any player that's going to treat their game like a business, because that's really what they are. You're not going to employ a 30-man team of analytics like the MLB teams are doing or NBA teams are doing. But to completely ignore it on the same level is you're doing your business a disservice. And so, again, trying to get players to think more around like CEO of their own company, analytics needs to be part of that at some level. Every player is going to be a little bit different in how that's incorporated, but I think at least having these understandings of what's out there and how ShotLink data, because that's going to be obviously the most readily available data, but then what is done with that? How do you improve your game? Where do you identify places in your game that can be improved? What's the lowest hanging fruit? Just because you have a weakness doesn't mean, hey, that's where I should spend the majority of my time. And just because you have a strength doesn't mean you ignore that or, only spend a little bit of time. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute of how do we identify the best places to be practicing? And then the whole course prep, tournament prep, how do we map out a course? How do we make decisions that are data driven as opposed to just feel? What's the combination of the two? Using the data with your caddy so that the caddy can have an understanding around these decisions. There's a lot that goes into it. And again, if I'm the player, I'm the CEO of my business and the product is my play on the course, I want everything at my fingertips to be able to make the best decisions.
For sure. And, we'll use the term analytics obviously throughout our conversation, Aaron, but information is really, it's a form of information, right? Just like how your body is feeling that day is a form of information and how you are swinging the club is a form of information, right? Maybe it's a little more quantitative than it is qualitative, but these athletes, these golfers have been doing this for so long and they do it every day. So they're so finely attuned to when those things kind of deviate off their norm. And so, this type of information and then how we obviously apply it, which we'll talk about is kind of what we're after here. And we break it down, you kind of alluded to it, but we break it down in 3 buckets. So core strategy, which is admittedly probably like the sexiest part of it. It's definitely the part I talk the most about probably of, what are we doing at number 4 at Napa, or what are we doing at number 5 at Black Desert coming up next week? Like, there's a lot of really interesting holes in the PGA Tour where you see golfers do different things, different players in the field employ different strategies. So course strategy gets the majority, probably the conversation, but tournament prep, what does Monday through Wednesday look like? What are you going to spend your time doing? Which is kind of an extension of what we call performance analytics, which is kind of the player skill, your skill profile. Where are you lacking? How do I identify trends? Is 1 week, is 2 weeks, is 4 weeks? Like, how do I know when I need to change up how I'm practicing? How should I practice? If I'm making a swing change, if I'm not, all of these types of things, because we're constrained by time and kind of our physiology, right? I cannot hit balls for 8 hours straight. I would have a huge diminishing return on the, the 8th hour of practice there. So how do I structure an off week and on week, an off week when I'm not playing the following week versus an off week when I am playing the following week, all of that type of stuff. How do we, dial that in to make it as efficient as possible? And those are the types of things, you hinted at it, the golfer's the CEO of the company. This, and maybe tennis being the other one, is kind of the only sport where they show up to work every day and do kind of whatever they want to do. An NBA player, an NFL player does, obviously they've got input with their coaches and those types of things. But by and large, if you're an NBA player, you show up and do what the coach tells you to do that day. And you might be a role player who's going to work on those specific parts of the role that he's expected to do for the team. And so, that can be a really positive thing for a professional golfer, an aspiring professional golfer. But if you're not focused on it, right, it can also be a detriment, or at least something that, you're not as efficient as you could be with your time and with your prep and with your practice.
Yeah. I mean, I think back to, the end of that, what you were saying there, and we're fortunate enough to see some of the best players in the world and how they operate and how they run their day to day. And the best players clearly operate their day differently than the rest of the guys on tour. And especially as guys are learning what their rhythms are, what their best practices are, how they should be setting up their standard day. And everyone's going to be different. It doesn't mean you have to model it the same way as those top players, but understanding like, hey, what do I need to accomplish throughout a day? What do I need to accomplish Monday through Wednesday? What do I need to accomplish pre and post game on a Thursday through Sunday? And then the off weeks, is rest the accomplishment that day and recovery, or is it working on something? That's, identifying all those things and having a clear plan is huge. And it's a better way, more efficient way to have no wasted energy, no wasted time. And as you all know, out on PGA Tour, your time is probably your most precious commodity. Like, you just don't have enough time in the day for everything. And so understanding what's your highest and best use that day, that hour, that minute is super important.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if you want to expand on that, you can.
No, you're absolutely right. The time is the big constraint that we have, the professional golfers have on themselves. And again, when you walk into an NFL or an NBA practice, every minute is scheduled out, because they got up for maybe 2 hours on the court or an hour and a half on the court, right? A Tuesday on the PGA Tour is going to be some form of activation, practice, probably 9 holes, some practice after, some physio work, maybe a lift, right? A light lift or whatever, depending. And that's like 6-7 hours. Then you might have a corporate thing. Maybe you just want to get some rest because you're going on 3 weeks in a row, whatever it might be. And so building out that day really kind of ruthlessly efficiently is very, very important, because you're going to do that 20, 25 times a year, maybe 30 plus times a year, depending on who you are as a player. And so it's really important to be very efficient with those things. And one of the things I have players do, this isn't analytical at all, but when we start working together, say, sit down with a blank piece of paper, or maybe we do it on a Zoom call, and write me out your perfect Monday through Wednesday. What does it look like? Like in chunks, right? How many times do you see in the golf course? Well, okay, I'm going to go hit balls. Is the purpose of that warming up? Is it working on a swing feel? Is it, what's the purpose of hitting balls there? And go through the entire 3-day period. You can do the same thing with, pre-round for each of your days pre-round, right? There's great clips of guys like JJ Redick and Donovan Mitchell on social media talking about their off-season program or their pre-game. And, an NBA player is playing 82 games. It's about the number of rounds a PGA Tour player is going to play in a year, right? And so
Yep.
it's knowing that and having that down and having the things that you want to accomplish really clear is really, really important for those guys.
Well, and I think one of the keys you said there, because I go through a similar practice, which is interesting, but is not just what you're doing, but the intention. And I think sometimes what I see and what I've even talked to players about is sometimes they forget why they're even doing that thing, or they're going through the motion because they think they're supposed to and they see other guys doing it, but the intention isn't quite there. And it doesn't mean it's wasted time, but it can be a lot more efficient, even just by identifying what that intention is. It makes that time and practice and energy spent so much more worthwhile.
Yeah, and I would break that into kind of 3 buckets, right? We'll use hitting balls as an example, but there's kind of 3 buckets of intention. It's like you're going through your bag, you're getting loose, you're getting warm, you're hitting shots. You're not really trying to like accomplish a specific shot, but you need to go through the bag once, right? Then you kind of have what I would call like technical work, and that is anything you are working on or trying to re-ingrain. This is where like block practice is totally useful and acceptable. And people talk about block versus random all the time. Well, like I am trying to make with a mid iron, I'm trying to get up +1 path with a 0 face because I want to hit a baby draw or something like that. Right? You're trying to hit that number on the TrackMan. You're working with your swing coach to try to hit a position, try to ingrain a feel. You're using video, you're using TrackMan, right? You're doing all of those things. And that's like a good percentage of your range session, right? If you're going to be out there for 2 hours, that may be an hour of it, is working on those things at different parts of your bag, whether it's wedges, mid irons, long irons, clubs, whatever. But then the last part, and the one that is definitely, I think we see the most variation among PGA Tour players, in what I call like the execution based part of the session, right? Where we are going to take what we are trying to ingrain and we are going to challenge you with it. And we're going to give you kind of a gamified approach to executing on those things. And we're going to try to replicate what we'll see on the golf course. Maybe not perfectly to a T, but based on depending on what we're working on, where we've identified maybe the focus area of your game, or maybe what the golf course is going to ask of us this week, we're going to design protocols around that based on the statistics to help you to kind of put you in the fire a little bit and make you go execute on that. Some players I see do this religiously and do it really, really well. Certainly it's something I'm a huge fan of. And then there are probably some players who straight up do not do this ever on the driving range or on the putting green, which, there's a wide variety of personalities and people, and no one thing is right for everybody. But I would argue kind of all of the literature and all the research has showed us that these, randomized games, and we can get into some of the specifics here, Aaron, but like this randomization, giving you a win-loss criteria on a certain game, will really kind of cauterize what you're trying to learn and the skill you're trying to acquire and make you better for it long term.
Yeah, I think understanding, hey, we can't replicate the pressure of a Sunday afternoon or Friday afternoon for some guys, or the first tee shot on Thursday. But if we can gamify and give that win-loss scenario for certain practice parts of our game, it's the closest thing to the real thing. And again, we're not trying to have the exact same, because we know we can't have that. But if we can get something close, it's going to help prepare for playing under pressure, nerves, whatever people want to call it. Like, you feel slightly different under the gun, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, and the best players in the world rise to that occasion and channel that and learn how to channel that. I don't think it's always hey, you can either do it or you can't. I think it's practicing it and understanding, how do I get better under this type of scenario. And so any sort of gamified approach like that has numbers behind it, where it's not just making it up out of thin air, is going to be a good thing. But I even go back to like when you're kids, like you want to beat your buddy in a putting contest or an up and down contest or whatever it may be. Like, that's as close to the pressure you're going to see on the golf course as you can get. How do we, if we take it to the next level, like, I want to get to tournament prep, and we'll get to course prep a little bit at the end, and do kind of a sneak peek of that. We'll do that on another episode. But as far as taking first taking the sample size and the data that all the PGA Tour players have at their fingertips through ShotLink. If they're able to access that, what's the first step there of taking a look at it, analyzing it, and then creating some sort of practice plan for, right now we're in the fall. So your players are either in their off season or about to be in their, 3-week off season that you guys get, or, anything in between. But how do we identify in a little bit of time to improve and work on things? What's the best place to be spending our time and building a plan around that?
Yeah. So, ShotLink is a great resource, right? The PGA Tour has developed this incredible asset from a data standpoint with ShotLink. They've obviously built it out over the last decade or two. And there's so many different applications of it, right? So what we're talking about here is a very specific application of ShotLink. And, again, analogizing it back to the baseball teams, like they've got dozens of people looking at it. And, part of the reason I think that I exist is because I'm taking this very, trying to solve and answer these very specific questions that are oriented towards the player and their coach and their team, whether it's for course strategy or in this case, identifying, their performance analysis and what they need to do to try to get better going into next year, going into their last few events in the fall. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some math behind the scenes with it to, one, make it really actionable, right? Because ShotLink at its core is just a list of shots. It's all it is. And there's a bunch of random coordinates that if you looked at the data file wouldn't mean anything to you, right? But they mean something relative to each other. So the first thing we want to do is
leave that to the experts to look at.
Yeah. That's where the coding part comes in. Is very, very helpful to. We don't do it by hand, sir. But so the first thing that we do with TourIQ is we take strokes gained, which is awesome. Mark Brody, Columbia professor, built strokes gained, probably 20 years ago. And it's a great way to kind of evaluate all shots on a level playing field. But we need to make it a little more specific to the player and to the situation, right? So, Aaron, I know you and I could think of dozens of situations on tour where maybe you have a chip greenside and it's, take PGA National when they didn't overseed it down in West Palm as an example of this. Like grainy Bermuda, you're 10 feet below the green, you're going up over a hump and it's short-sided to a pin, and it's just like nightmare fuel, especially for guys like you and me, much less PGA Tour players. But like, you've got to hit either a nippy 60 or a putt or a bump. There's guys play that shot all different ways, right? That's a really, really hard pitch shot. It might be on paper, it's 20 yards from the fairway maybe, or 15 yards from the fairway. And that's all that strokes gained would know about that shot. But what we can do, again, since we're trying to answer a very specific question, is use, 50 or 60 guys might go down there over the 4 days over the course of a week. So we've got a really good idea of how that actually plays to all the different pin locations. And we go to that course every year, and that course doesn't really change. And maybe one year they overseed it, so we account for that. But the course doesn't really change. Most courses on tour relatively similar year over year. And so we've now got maybe 200 guys who have been down there over the last 4 or 5 years in that one spot on the hole. So we can actually really accurately and precisely grade the difficulty of every shot on tour, because we've got this really rich data set of a bunch of other people have generally been in that spot before as well. So we call it expected strokes, which is basically kind of like just built on top of strokes gained, but it gives us precision around each shot. So you hear this all the time talking to especially short game coaches on tour, like, hey, is he a bad chipper or does he always leave himself in tough spots? Which are two totally different things, right? But this now allows us to kind of unlock the answer to that and say, well, you're in really, really tough spots. Maybe it's a problem with your iron play, actually, or your course strategy. But if you're always leaving it in tough spots, on the PGA Tour's like headline statistics, you'd show up as a bad chipper. But you may not actually be. You may be like closer to a tour average chipper who's always in tough spots. And if we don't get that part of the math right, we may go work on the wrong things. None of this is binary, but like we may spend a little more time here than we should there, when we should be spending the time like on our short iron or mid iron approach play, because we're missing too many greens in those bad spots. And so getting that math part right, which is like super not sexy and like the nerdy part of all of this, but it's really important to get it right, because that's what's going to inform what we spend our time on, right? And so if you are just to extend that chipping example, like if you're someone who has been leaving it in tough spots, we can actually say like, yeah, you're hitting your chips to 12 feet, but that's what everyone hits those chips from. You're actually about a tour average level chipper. Like, yeah, we'd like to get that better, but where you're hurting yourself is more your short iron, mid iron play, because two left-sided pins, you're always missing left, just as a generic example here. And that's when you tend to have most of those kind of really difficult, above average difficulty shots. So we would actually say like, hey, maybe we need to go work on short and mid iron play, two left pins, and build some games around that for that example.
That's great. Yeah, I can see how just the raw data could just overgeneralize, could be a little bit misleading. I think there was always this thought that, hey, over the course of a whole season, the extra hard shot and the extra easy shot are going to average each other out, and everyone's going to kind of regress to the mean or be in the middle on all, if he's a better than average chipper or a worse than average chipper, he's gonna have some easy chips, some hard chips, it'll figure itself out. But it's actually not true. Like, you need some context behind the data. And it's not saying the data's wrong, it's just adding context to it, it seems like. And to your point, it's not, hey, binary, we're not gonna practice chipping because actually we're a little bit better than we think, but it's more, hey, let's identify an issue of, hey, maybe our proximity to hole in those, 150 to 175 isn't that bad. But to a short left pin or a short right pin, we keep missing in the same spot and short-sighting ourselves and having an above average difficulty chip, which is then leaving us a 6 to 8 footer as opposed to a 2 to 3 footer. So we're just by the percentages, we're missing more of those 6 to 8 footers. Now we start creeping into, hey, are we a bad putter too? Our scrambling percentage is going down. I think there's all these extrapolations of players understand like the feel behind it. Like, hey, I don't feel like a bad chipper, but if the numbers say I'm 120th in chipping, then maybe I do need to work on it. And now all of a sudden it's a confidence thing. I don't want to go down too far the rabbit hole, but I think that understanding context around the data and your guys's, strokes gained is from the tour, and then yours is layered on top is what is it called?
We call it expected strokes.
Yeah. So that expected strokes adds a ton of context for that. And now I'm a player. I have this expected strokes. You and I have taken a look at all the data, and we've identified. Let's use an example. Like, give me an example of something you identified with a player and were able to work on since, let's say, Tour Championship or the playoffs.
Yeah, so calendar-wise, right? And I'll hit on one thing you said there, Aaron, that I think is important. It's never the data is right or wrong. Like, the data is just literally the location of the golf ball and whether it was in the rough or the fairway. The conclusion we draw from it and the intervention we take because of what we think it's telling us is, and again, not right or wrong in a binary sense, but like going to lead us down one path or have us put more weight on one area or another. And that's the thing we just want to be really precise with when we're making these recommendations and kind of designing these interventions with players, because again, like, quarters of a shot matter out here. Being a half shot better is the difference between being in the Tour Championship and missing the playoffs sometimes. So over the course of a round, all these margins really, really add up. So, but I'll give you an example. A player we work with who came to us in the middle of this season, and kind of knew his iron play was not up to standard, right? He could look at a strokes gained approach number and be like, it's negative, that's bad. And that's correct, obviously. But that's not enough to be like, how do I make it not negative? And, play better is obviously like an easy, like, very blunt force thing. Like, yeah, you and your swing coach go like hit irons better. But okay, that's not really a recommendation or an intervention. Everyone's always trying to do that. Always trying to be more consistent, always trying to, hit the shapes they want to hit the spots and lines that they want to hit. And so if everybody's doing that, like, how do I really drill into very specific situations and identify those places in that player's game, right? And so with approach play specifically, obviously breaking it down by distance, we tend to only look at shots from the fairway. Shots from the rough, you're generally trying to find the green, the way the rough is on the PGA Tour. There's obviously certain weeks where you can be a little more aggressive, but you get that Bermuda rough right late in the year, like we had at Memphis or Atlanta, and it's like, man, you're just trying to like pitch it front edge and hope it stays most of the time. Yeah. So we look at just shots from the fairway. We can break it down by pin location, and obviously break it down by yardage bucket. And we can also, I think one thing that's important here is like break it down. We call it temporally, but across time. Like you made the point, Aaron, of like, yes, over the course of a large enough sample, that those strokes gained and expected strokes numbers would kind of level out, right? If you had a bazillion chip shots that you hit on tour, some would be hard, some would be easy, and they would kind of level out to being a tour average difficulty chip shot. Well, hey, guess what? Like, I got a tournament in 3 weeks. Like, I got to decide what to do. So I can't wait till the end of the year in sample size to figure itself out. Like, the question is coming up of like, what have I done the last 2 or 3 weeks like that has ticked out of its like normal range, and like where do I need to hone it back in, or where do I've been working on this thing, is it coming, is it improving, is it coming up the way I would want it to, is it translating in tournaments? And so we can't really wait for like the law of large numbers to kick in, essentially, right? So there was a player who came to us middle of the season, knew his approach play kind of was not where he wanted it to be. We really picked out like 100 to 125, so kind of full sand wedge, full gap wedge, and maybe some feely pitching wedges in there for this player as his big area of focus. And specifically for him, he had an issue with front right pins. Just the nature of his ball flight, the nature of his shape. If you're a player who moves the ball right to left, which a lot of players tend to do with their irons, especially shorter irons, that can be kind of a challenging hole location, because it might mean you're starting it out outside the green, and it might mean if you're a little defensive, you're miss. If you're a little long, players tend to miss long left or short right, unless you're a lefty. But long left or short right, like it doesn't really work for that pin location. At least for this player, it wasn't. So we identified that. And we put a lot of times our interventions, and I've used this term a couple of times, intervention just means like, what are we going to do about it? Is going to be some form of a game. And the game kind of has to have 3 principles. It's got to be gamified. So you've got to be able to win or lose it. We're not just going to hit 20 shots and go, okay, cool, good job. You've got to be able to win or lose. There's got to be, we talked about pressure. No, we're never going to replicate Sunday at the Masters pressure on the driving range in Mississippi, but we're going to make it worth something, and we're going to track it, right? So it's got to be gamified. It's got to be representative. So if we're building like a win-loss, working with this guy yesterday, and we were saying, okay, you're going to drop a ball on the course, and you've got to hit it for that range, for the 100 to 120, you've got to hit it inside of 20 feet for it to be a win. The tour average from 110 is about 20 feet proximity. So in this guy's case, because we're trying to get him back to average and then to above average in this area, we just want him to beat tour average right now. And so he's got to hit that shot inside of 20 feet to a tucked pin. Can't do that to the middle of the green, but to a tucked pin. He's got to hit that inside of 20 feet. And it's got to be periodized, which I just hinted at. But right now, we're setting the ring basically at this, and he's got to hit it inside there for the shot to be a win. And we'll add up, he's got to do it 5 out of 9 times if we do it in a 9-hole session. He should get better at that over time. We should shrink that ring over time. So this concept of periodization, the same thing, the analogy I always make is weightlifting. Like, you don't go bench 135 your whole life. Like, you start benching 135, and hopefully at some point you get stronger and you go to 185 and 225. And big, strong guys like you, Aaron, bench 325, right? So
I was gonna say I'm still working on 135, so
exactly.
I don't know about that.
So, but the game should evolve with the player over time, right? So every 2-3 weeks, so we set that win-loss threshold for the whole game. And if you beat it 5 times in a row, we're going to shrink, depending on what the game is, but we're going to shrink the ring or the number of reps that you have to complete the task. They can all be a little different, whether it's putting or chipping or iron play or driving. But that's the periodization. So it's gamified, it's representative, and it's periodized, right? So you can win or lose. It's based on your statistics, based on kind of like what our goals are from the course. And we're going to track it over time. And if you're continually crushing it, we're going to make it tougher on you because we want you to continue to grow. And if you're continually losing, we're going to loosen the ring too. That doesn't happen as much, but like we would loosen the ring up too. And if a player's like really struggling in this area, we don't want him like feeling like he's banging his head against the wall. So all the literature shows us that you should win, with skill acquisition, you should win between 50 and 75% of the time. Somewhere in there is the sweet spot. And that's actually really important to communicate to players when you're designing these interventions with them, because these guys are super competitive. And there's certainly guys I work with that will like lose a game and we'll be on the practice green or the driving range and they shoot me a look, or maybe they use, you know, a 4-letter word, and which is good.
Never.
They're competing, right? Which is what we want out of them. They care.
Yeah.
That's gonna, you know, drive that improvement, like by being super focused and trying really hard to win. But yeah, it's got to kind of meet all of those criteria for us with those parameters. There's one we do in shipping that's really fun. So there's one we do in shipping where we set a bunch of shots around a green, around a practice green. You got multiple pins, and you kind of walk around. You never hit. Another principle here would be you never hit the same shot twice, ideally. And so randomized would be another principle. And so in this game, you end up moving around the green to different spots and hitting at different pins, hitting it inside of proximities. And those are all the levers we pull on how hard we want to make the game. But what happens in the shipping game is you get further and further down the line, and it's like, okay, maybe you have 3 spots left. And if you don't hit it in the ring, you got to walk all the way across the green to hit your next shot. And if you don't hit that one in the ring, like you're down to 2 balls, you got to walk all the way back to that same ball. We call it the walk of shame. But it's even that little bit of pressure that we're applying. And because like these, again, I mean, if I took you out there right now and do it, like, and made you play this chipping game, Aaron, like it gets really frustrating and you really don't want to walk across the green again. And hopefully, if you're someone who's taking it seriously, like that's going to make you focus. That's going to make you lock in even 5% more than you would have on a, you know, just a normal hit and giggle. And that's going to be some of it that helps it translate it and colorize it in our mind and kind of the neuroplasticity and our, you know, neurological system to lock in that, you know, that experience and that hopefully improvement over time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because I've seen you do that game with some of your players, and it just raises the level of focus in those times. And one of the biggest things I notice between the top players in the world and even like a top 50 player in the world is the level of intention and focus on every single movement and shot that's hit in a practice round. I'm not even talking about the tournament rounds. And to the level of, I remember we were walking a practice round at the PGA Championship, and a player's caddy dropped a ball next to it. He had dropped a hole marker where a pin was going to be in the tournament, and the caddy dropped 2 balls for him to chip. And the player goes, "No, move that ball. I'll never hit it there." And I kind of like looked and listened, kind of hear what he was going to say. He goes, "I know we can't be past that pin." He moved that ball 2 yards. That's how specific he was with his chipping practice and intention, because he was like, "I'll never hit it there, but 2 yards from there, yes, I could hit it there." And it was that specificity of like how focused they are on every movement matters and every practice shot matters from an energy standpoint. They're not going to waste anything out there. So I love the parameters that you set with those 3 or 4 principles around those practices. And, you know, I can imagine whether it be wedge game and that 100 to 125, I would imagine you're going to see results. Everyone's going to be different, but like fairly quickly if you're really focusing on it, because you're going to be able to identify what the issue is, whether it's just time spent on it, whether it's a technical issue, whether it's a strategic issue. Obviously, the longer, further away you are, now maybe technical comes into it and there's more variance, but I think everyone can agree if you're on PGA Tour, like your wedges, you're going to be able to get close if you're going with the right strategy, have the right technique, you know, and have the right numbers. It's just a matter of focus, and I shouldn't say focus, but of intention on those shots. And so if you're starting to see that periodization, so I didn't really know what that meant until we talked about it. Not hey over the whole season, but maybe the last 3 weeks, this has gotten a little out of whack for me. Maybe not compared to everybody else, but for me, this is a little out of whack. I need to go back and, hey, I know this course coming up, there's a lot of shots between 100 and 125. I need to make sure I spend more time on this, gamify it, have it be based, you know, on what we're going to see. Maybe talk to me a little bit about that I don't want to get like into full on like course mapping or prep mode, but like how about just identifying, hey, going into the rest of the fall, these guys have Utah, this is going to come out probably the week of Utah, but Utah, Cabo, Bermuda, RSM, or guys are going to be going into the spring, into January. You got Century, which hopefully gets played. We don't know where yet. But you got the 3 Palm Springs courses. You got the 2 courses at Torrey Pines. You got Riviera. You got Phoenix Open at TPC Scottsdale. Like all different types of courses. But how about just identifying, hey, this is a spot or an area of, I'm going to have more than average amount of approach shots from this distance, or hey, I know this course I'm going to hit a lot more drivers, or this course I'm going to hit a lot more shots from 250 to 275 off the tee. How do you break that down and then turn that into that same systemized practice, if you will?
Yeah, you hit on something really relevant at the beginning there, Aaron, and talking about, why we track this stuff over time. Again, compare this to the player who maybe hits 57 irons in a row and then calls it a day and maybe feels like they hit it good or feels like they didn't hit it good. This can help us identify when there's a technical flaw, or if there's a technical flaw. Like if I take someone through the same, or a similar 100 to 125, like a full wedge combine every day for 2 weeks, right? It's only 18 shots or so, but we did that every day for 2 weeks and we never passed it. And we kept loosening parameters and we still weren't passing it. And we were losing strokes compared to the tour numbers and all of that. We clearly at that point have a technical flaw. You don't even need 2 weeks or 3 weeks to identify that. You can probably identify it in, a couple of sessions there. And one of the nice things about TrackMan, if you use it appropriately, is it's going to give us a much higher sample size of data than waiting to go play a bunch of tournaments, because you might only hit 3 of those around in a tournament, or 4, something like that. You have 18 approach shots. And maybe a quarter of them are, 100 to 125 or 150, depending on the course. Torrey Pines, you'll have none. And then we can get that kind of signal a lot quicker. Bring the swing coach in, talk about that. Something they're probably already aware of, but boy, we really need to figure out a 3/4 pitching wedge. We are really having trouble with that 128 number or whatever it might be, right? Which is a hammer gap, but if it's a green that's going to spin, I can't hit a hammer gap, so I've got to hit a handsy pitch, and I just do not have that shot, because every time it comes up in the combine, I lose a quarter of a stroke, right? So you could, by doing it in that standardized way, you can identify that so much quicker, right? Whether it's me looking at the reports afterwards, the player just this is always coming up, and I'm always getting a grade, so I'm it's just resonating with them a lot quicker. And to your point, we do see when it's not a technical flaw. So sometimes it might be I need to add a new shot to my arsenal. I am going to go work with my swing coach and try to add this shot to I need to take 2,000 RPM off a pitching wedge. How am I going to do that? I've never done that before, or whatever it might be. But when it's something that's just man, they've got all the skills, they've got all the biomechanics for it, which obviously these guys are uber talented, but they just don't have, the reps, or they haven't tried to hit that shot a bunch, and now we're asking them to hit it. We see that come up pretty quickly, right? So this 100 to 125 example we've been talking about, that was at the end of the playoffs. We kind of identified that. And at Napa and Sanderson, this player went out, and I think at Napa, he went 7 for 7 green and reg from that yardage, with average proximity. So he gained strokes because he never missed a green, never short-sided himself, and had field average, was average for the week in terms of proximity from that yardage. So he picked up some strokes, certainly compared to where he had been previously. Then at Sanderson, he beat proximity by 5 feet. And he had really good showings at both those events as well. Sanderson especially, both those courses have, a little more bias towards the short irons. They're not super, super long golf courses. And so we should see, those interventions pay off relatively quickly. That is not a multi-month, that's on a week-by-week basis. We should see kind of little step function increases in those things. So that's worth pointing out. It's really good to track this stuff, because it allows you to see boy, I just can't execute this thing, or if I can, I should see it kind of quickly get better. And we see that all the time with players. But on the preparation side, really week to week, using the West Coast swing as the example there. I mean, God, different types of grasses, different types of golf courses. You go to Sony, which is a Seth Rayner, old school dog legs, you're moving 3 woods and 2 irons off the tees there, and trying to shape shots. The Bermuda, depending on if it's 3 inches, can be kind of gnarly, like Jumper City, trying to read Bermuda lies there. Then you go to, you know, Torrey, which totally different grass, you know, Riviera, which is Kikuyu, obviously, and, you know, really low rough, typically very tough fairways to hit. Obviously, great greenside surrounds there. A lot of chipping happens at Riviera. Relatively low green and regulation course. So each week we're going to kind of put together a package on the golf course, and we do it from like, we do the individual holes, obviously the course strategy about specific tee shots and specific pin locations and targets, but also like the macroeconomic, like what is the course going to ask of us? And so that tends to look like, you know, what are the approach yardages plus or minus kind of a typical tour week? Because again, a guy's still going to hit 4 irons Monday through Wednesday, but like, you know, we're not going to the Mexico Open anymore, but you go to the Mexico Open, you're hitting 4 irons everywhere around the golf course, right? Or Torrey Pines, you're certainly going to hit a lot more 4 irons than you would at probably TPC Scottsdale or Pebble Beach, certainly, right? And so, you know, on a relative basis, what is it going to ask from us from a yardage standpoint for our approach game? Around the greens, what types of shots? So literally just breaking down like short and long, fairway, rough and bunker. You know, Torrey Pines has a lot more rough chipping. Pebble has a lot of rough chipping. Waste management is like overseeded, obviously, because we're playing there so early in the year. So where's that distribution of shots fall? So what should I be working on the practice green? Obviously, once we're on the course, we're looking at the specific shots, the specific pin locations, those types of things, and then the putting distribution as well. So if you take a really high green and regulation golf course, like we have this week coming up in Utah, I forget the number, but it's well into the 70s, maybe even close to 80% green and reg for the field last year. So like everyone's hitting the greens. We got a lot of like, it becomes a 15 to 25, 30 foot putting contest, essentially. The fairways are very wide there. If you miss the fairway, you're pretty much taking a penalty stroke because it's desert, but very high fairway rate, very high green and reg rate. So being able to make mid-length long putts. So we want to work on like speed control for mid-length long putts in our prep during the week. And we also want to get on the course. We don't want to grind over 6-footers like we would at Sawgrass, because Sawgrass, you're going to miss a bunch of greens and have a bunch of 6-footers for par. We want to hit like where the kind of the common spots that I'm going to have that 20 to 25 footer for birdie to each of these pin locations and try to drill those in. Because we may even see some, when we go out on the golf course, we're looking for stuff like, boy, this is kind of a common area I could see myself having a putt from, or we can see that in the data explicitly. And boy, that putt does something totally different than I thought it would. And I'm going to put that in my book, right? Because the players are allowed to observe, you know, through their own eyes and their own feet and what they see, and they can write that in their book. They obviously can't use any external implements or green reading tools nowadays, but we can go say, hey, here's the common spots. And when you see something from a common spot, so we know it's got a high likelihood of coming up, that really like breaks in a way that's different than you'd expect, like that should probably make it into you and your caddy's book. Everyone's got a little bit of a different process there.
Yeah, I think just even understanding going into a week, like let's say I'm reviewing this, I'm the player, I'm reviewing this Thursday, Friday, the week before, you know, it's the off week, Utah is going to be next week. And so I'm reviewing, all right, this is, and you know, ideally actually you should probably be reviewing this 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time so that you're spending the whole week leading up to it practicing this. But even just going into mapping out what my practice round is going to be like, knowing, hey, I need to be hitting a lot of putts from the middle of the greens, understanding where those, you know, we have last year's pins, we know where those are going to go, and being able to make some of those notes. And I think one thing I've seen, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong or give me insight, but it seems like this will help some of the younger players shorten the learning curve of getting out on tour and learning new courses, but also playing the same course 10 years in a row, something like that these veterans have. But at the same time, I've also seen where veterans being able to use this data and the analytics of it to put numbers and kind of quantify some of their feels. Where, hey, I know like this course is going to have a lot of longer approach shots, but they don't quite have the actual numbers behind it, where this analysis can say, hey, yeah, you're correct, and the numbers you need to be working on is 190 to 210 or 190 to 215, as opposed to like, hey, I think I hit a lot more like 6, 7, and 5 irons. Well, that's great, but like, why not dig even deeper and actually know what those numbers are? When I first got into business, I read a book called Measure What Matters, and it's just all about like, if you want to improve, it's measuring what and quantifying what you're trying to improve on, and then constantly assessing that.
Yeah.
And I think that the same applies, if not even more so, when it comes to sports analytics, whether it be basketball, soccer, obviously in golf, this data there's an abundance of data at this point, and now it's figuring out what's the best way to use it to improve.
Yeah, you're spot on. Like in the early noughts, the problem was like collecting this information, right? Or if you're a college team right now, your problem is collecting this information. But at the PGA Tour level, it's what do I do with this information? How do I'm going to go out there on Tuesday. I'm going to be at the course for about 6 hours. What are we doing? And so using Utah as an example, I just pulled their stuff up. Inside of 150, so, approach starts at 50 yards. Everything inside of 50 is scrambling. But so from 50 to 150 is de-emphasized at Utah. I mean, you only have 24, 30, about 30% of your shots are going to come inside of 150, 30% of your approach shots, compared to 28% of your approach shots are going to come from 150 to 175 at Black Desert Resort. And that's 8% higher than tour average. So a normal tour week is like 1 in 5 shots come from there. And this week it's going to be about 1 in 4, almost like 1 in 3 shots coming from 150 to 175. And then so 150 to 225 are all higher than tour average this week. So like, what are we going to do on Tuesday? We're going to work through 150 to 225. Like, yeah, we're going to work through our bag. Yeah, we're going to work on the feels and the general things we're working on. We're not taking away from what we're doing with our coach. We're not taking away from where we're trying to get our swing to be. But then, okay, we've done each of those from like 30 or 45 minutes. What are we spending the last 30 or 45 minutes on the range? We're spending it in that, like in those distance buckets, at those times. And if it's a course with really firm greens, we might say, hey, like, how do we take, get some extra apex on these and practice bringing these down a little bit softer, right? If it's really soft greens, like talk about how am I going to get to back pins with soft greens, right? Which is a really challenging thing for these guys who generate so much spin, obviously, with the golf ball. And so whether that be sometimes that's a TrackMan combine we make specific to the yardages. I mean, again, we're sitting on top of all the data, Aaron. You pretty much know how far you're going to have in every green. Like, yeah, tweak it up and down for wind, tweak it up and down for firmness. Like, we know how far you hit it off the tee. We know how far the field hits into the screen. Like, we know that, on certain holes, nobody hits driver. So, we don't just take the distance of the hole and subtract 300 to get your approach yardage, right? Like, we know very, very specifically where you're going to hit from. And so we tailor that preparation that way. To, again, like, you're going to spend time doing something. Let's do the thing that's going to be most impactful and kind of give you the most ROI for your time. So, and then obviously all that still trickles into what do we do when we actually get on the course Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? How are we going to make that time efficient? And some of those things. So yeah, all of that, again, these little margins matter so much over the course of the year. Go pull up PGAtour.com strokes gained, and the difference between 30 and 51 is, really, really big. And now, we have this kind of extra benchmark with, top 50, getting a lot of spoils at the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole theme of, us having these conversations is how do players create and convert their talent into value. And if we're just relying on talent alone, then, we're leaving a lot out there. I'm, again, not trying to compare myself by any means, but I look back at my fledgling pro golf career, 15 years ago, and to have this type of direction to practice around, like, I look back and I had no clue what I was practicing. I thought I did. I thought I was practicing efficiently, but it was like, yeah, my quantification was how much time was I spending?
Yep.
And which is a bad barometer. Obviously you can't be lazy, but that's a bad barometer. You mentioned one thing about like college, like availability of data, like a college team or player. To some extent, I would imagine the Korn Ferry Tour players as well. Like, I'm a Korn Ferry Tour player moving up to the PGA Tour. Like, obviously, there's some ShotLink data. I'm not sure, how that's comparable. but let's even go a step further, like a college player. What's the best way for them to try to look at analytics, at a high level to even start this process? Is it
shot tracker?
Thank you. Shot tracker? Is it TrackMan? Like what type of data can they get their hands on? Like they're not going to be able to get on course data from a college event or something like that. But is it going through combines on a TrackMan? Like what's a good way for them to get even started down this road of analytics?
Yeah, I think it's a different application, but still a lot of the same principles really apply. Your core strategy is going to be very different, right? Your core strategy, just by definition, unless you happen to be playing an event at a place that's held a PGA Tour event, you're not going to have that very specific course whole shot level data, down to the inch of where every golf ball's been and then what the proximity was from those spots and da-da-da. And so, and this is the same for, a guy playing mini tours or even Korn Ferries. It's pretty much analogous to a Korn Ferry player that, the information they have, obviously a little bit of data capture at the whole level on the Korn Ferry Tour, but not getting that same granular detail. And so what we say to, from a course strategy standpoint and the college teams that I work with, we're really having players build what I call a custom dispersion profile, right? So you're going through some combines on TrackMan, you're hitting shots in a game-like context, but we're basically doing it as data capture and doing it to understand, because if you're an elite 4-iron player, long iron player, and a kind of a mediocre wedge player relative to your skill, that should kind of inform your targeting strategies, right? And the thing to get a little mathy, the thing that people need to understand is dispersion. Although we always see it on TrackMan reports as a ring, right? It looks something like that, or maybe a little tilted, something like that. That ring implies a uniform distribution, like an even chance of ending up somewhere, plus or minus 10 yards of your target. But what we all know intuitively is the ball does not have an even chance of ending up, uniformly in that window. It's going to take what we call a Gaussian or a bell curve or a normal distribution shape. And so, because if I have even a college player, if I have them hit 207 irons in enough sample size and I plot where they all finish, I will eventually end up with a bell curve centered around their target, or maybe, a yard or two right or a yard or two left, depending on what their small bias is around that target. And so you actually want to know, again, getting a little mathy, but you actually want to know the width of that bell curve. That is what's informing your targeting strategy, because you can know what is 1 and 2 standard deviations off of your mean. And that can basically tell you, hey, when I hit a good shot, how often do I kind of miss it by? Is it 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards? And then when I hit most of my shots, how far do I miss it by? Is it 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 yards, right? Or what does that number look like? So 1 and 2 standard deviations of your, dispersion profile can pretty much inform you, because then you just need to understand, is the up and down really difficult, or is the up and down really easy, or is it a hazard, right? Because if it's a hazard, I basically need 0% chance that I'm going to go in there. If it's a very kind of stock, I think I'm going to chip this in pretty easy up and down green light, then I can probably just aim 1 standard deviation off the target, which I know what that is because I've done a bunch of work on TrackMan, and you and I, Aaron, are similar level golfers, but we have different parts of our game that we're good at, right? So you and I should not have the same targeting parameters necessarily when we go play competitive golf. And so building in all of that specific to the player, because we've got all the resources in college, right? You've got the TrackMan, you've got obviously the hitting bays, and most of these programs now having, have a course themselves for the better part of a day and all these types of things. So you can do, I actually think the team setting is really interesting. You get a little bit more kind of freedom and economies of scale to work on this stuff more broadly. It's very hard in a Tuesday practice round to go out and fire a bunch of wedges at tucked back left pins in a course setting, right? It doesn't really work on the PGA Tour. But a college team, if your coach is kind of dialed into this stuff, you totally could spend time working on those types of things, right? So I think from a core strategy standpoint, it's just creating that player specificity through dispersion profiling, and then applying that to the specific golf course kind of through what you read in the practice rounds. And again, that's having a checklist in the practice round, looking at the 4 corners of the green, looking at historical pin locations. Like these college coaches, I I assume they're saving last year's pin sheets because they're going to go back to the same tournaments and save the pin sheets so you know where they were last year. Throw those cups down. I mean, we take it for granted on the PGA Tour, but stuff like that can move the needle really far. And then, the training side of it's very similar, right? You don't have the ShotLink data, again, to give you like your strokes gained or your expected strokes in tournaments necessarily, although you can do some manual shot tracking. There's plenty of good applications that do that. But with the TrackMan and with the combines, again, you should be able to get that kind of information and act on it pretty darn quickly. My kind of working theory, and I'm not a college coach, so I don't want to speak for college coaches here, but pretty much every player is competing D1, certainly at a high level, has their swing coach, right? The college coaches, they can be a second set of eyes. They can help reinforce some things. The swing coach is obviously not always there like they are on the PGA Tour. They're usually back home where the kid's from. But their job is much more of that of a performance coach, right? Like more similar to a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, at least in my opinion, of, how are we going to design our day? How are we going to design these drills to allow these players to go get the most out of their games? Depending on, what this next tournament's going to ask of us, where each player kind of needs to work on their stuff. I would actually say in the team setting, you've got a lot of opportunity to affect that really nicely because you've got a locker room and you can put, one of the things we talk about with teams that I work with is like having like TrackMan leaderboards, right? And we've got a whiteboard up and we've got a standardized wedge combine that everybody does once a week. And like, we know what the all-time score is, and we know who's got the best score in the last month, and like it creates this competition. It's really healthy. It's really good. So I think the team setting has a lot of opportunities to leverage data and analytics, information in ways to help the teams get better, even though it looks different than the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I mean, talk about gamifying. Like I can't think of anything more competitive than your college team, and I don't care if the guy's not traveling, like how bad you wanted to beat your roommate or the guy on your team every single day, like that. You didn't care about anybody else. You want to beat that guy on your team, and like the raising the level and raising the bar together, I think is a huge opportunity. But I think that's interesting. I mean, that's not necessarily what this is centered around, but I think sometimes the assumption is, hey, we don't have that ShotLink data. Like there's not really a whole lot we can do. And I think that's incorrect. I think there's a lot you can do, especially with TrackMan and providing data sets that way. And then it'll come out really quickly on the course in a tournament. Like, is there another weakness or is there another strength that like isn't getting captured by this data? But for the most part, it's going to give the players a pretty good sense of where they're at. And then as with everything in golf, it's an adjustment and an ongoing adjustment. So all great. I could go another 2 hours probably on this and continue to deep dive on it, but I want to make sure that we save some for next time. Probably get a little bit more into course specific analytics and mapping a course and how that's done. But appreciate your time, Cory. Appreciate your insight, what you do with your players. It's been really fun to watch both behind the scenes and then see the results come out. Appreciate you sharing a little bit sneak peek behind the scenes for the people listening, and hopefully this helps them. I'll put your website in the show notes and kind of your handles so people can follow you and reach out that way. But thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with another episode of the PGA Players Podcast. Thanks, Cory.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks so much. Great chatting to you.
This has been a production from AWM Capital, the Athlete Family Office. Reach out to the team at athletefamilyoffice.com or by calling or texting 626-460-9278.